What's going on, guys? Arekkz here, welcome back to another video for Dauntless. This is the third episode in a series of Dauntless weapon guides that I'm putting together in light of the game entering open beta. The last episode went over the axe, but today we're turning our attention to another one of the game's heavier hitting offerings, the hammer. Again, I want to thank the guys over at Phoenix Labs for very kindly sponsoring this series. We've teamed up to cover all 5 of the available weapons, and across these videos I'll be going over everything you need to know from the basic moves and combos, all the way up to some overarching weapon theory. So that way, if you plan to jump in and give the game a shot during the open beta, you'll be able to do so with a good understanding of the weapons beforehand. The hammer, much like the axe, is another one of Dauntless's heavy-hitting powerhouse weapons. Equal parts maul and cannon, the hammer is capable of dishing out devastating, bludgeoning blows to a behemoth, breaking parts and faces in the process, but amidst all that devastation and destruction, you also have a cannon capable of dishing out explosive blasts. You can ride the blast into battle, dish them out mid-combo for extra damage, or even consume your shells to buff up your hits before you land them. For such a heavy and deliberate weapon, the hammer really is quite versatile. So, if taking on the role of a rocket-powered Thor sounds appealing to you, then this weapon might just be what you're looking for. Now, to begin with, it's important to understand that the hammer deals blunt or stagger damage, as opposed to cutting. This makes it perfect for breaking through a behemoth's armor plating or breaking bones, but also, more importantly, scoring those sweet knockouts. So it's for that reason that you want to try, where possible, to prioritize attacking the head. With that in mind, we're going to start with some of your basic combos, and then as we begin introducing the cannon portion of the weapon, we'll better explain the meter or gauge at the top of the screen. First up, your axe attacks are where all of your melee attacks are going to come from, so on the combo front this is actually pretty straightforward. Pressing X 3 times consecutively will perform the horizontal hammers combo. This is a series of wide horizontal swinging attacks that hit around waist height, so these are good if the behemoth has a head that is perhaps a little lower to the ground, they're knocked down, or just in general the area you want to attack isn't high above you. However, in times where you need a little bit more verticality, then you have the lunging strikes. Begin by pushing forward, or just running in general, and then pressing X 3 times consecutively. This time will begin with an overhead slam, followed by a lunge attack, and a final overhead slam. This attack's in a vertical path downwards. It's a very strong hit, but naturally, given the more precise nature, you'll typically use this when you're more certain about where you're attacking. The first combo is sort of like your spin to win, so to speak, a bit more wild, meanwhile this is more deliberate. And as always, should you need to, you can roll out mid-combo if you realise that you're losing your opening. However, you can also mix and match those into a combo known as repeating uppercuts. This begins with the wide swing from before, but then transitions into 2 upward swings, or uppercuts. Now this is especially useful if perhaps you're trying to attack the head of a target that stands a little taller, strike being a prime example. All of these attacks hit hard, and they can all work towards that eventual stagger, so really, while some of them may be a little bit stronger than others, ultimately you'll mix and match these combos based on your openings or the stance of the behemoth. So, moving on from there, let's now talk about the second component of the weapon, the cannon. This is where your Y attacks come in. Located at the top of the screen is your hammer gauge, and these 4 shells are your ammo. Pressing Y will fire out a shell, and each shot you fire depletes the ammo from this gauge. Pressing RB will then begin the reload animation. Now, reloading works around an active time system. If you press RB a second time when the marker is within this little line, you'll not only reload sooner, but you'll also reload more powerful shells. Meanwhile, if you press it too soon, too late, or not at all, you'll load in these weaker shells. However, it is pretty easy to pull off, so definitely get the habit of timing this correctly. Moving on from there, if you press Y 2 times consecutively, you'll perform the evasive blast. This consumes 2 shells and forces you backwards. You can also input a direction with this to change the direction that you are blasted. This is useful if you suddenly need to get out of the way of an incoming attack very quickly. Additionally, you can also work your blast into your combos if you want to dish out some more damage in the process. Pressing Y mid-combo will fire out a single shell. Meanwhile, pressing Y at the end of any of your X combos will instead unload all of your shells in this big concussive blast. This deals massive damage and is a great way to end a combo if you have a good opening. However, it doesn't end there. While sprinting, pressing Y will then allow you to ride your hammer and launch yourself forwards. Following this first launch, you then have 2 options. You can either very quickly afterwards press Y a second time for a double jump, useful if you need to cover more ground, or you can press X for an aerial strike. Furthermore, this rocket boost move is also an attack, and it's a great move for interrupting a behemoth. So in situations like this, turning your back to a behemoth and performing a hammer jump can often knock it down mid-charge, in turn opening up a nice opportunity for damage. Now, there's one final thing you need to know about the hammer, and this last one is a little more advanced, but mastering this will take your hammer play to the next level. See, your shells can also be used to empower your attacks. They're not just glorified bullets. If you press Y during the wind up of an attack animation, in other words, right as you begin the move, you'll consume a shell, and that single attack is then powered up. You can then work this into the entire combo if you go, for example, XY, XY, XY. You need to press it during the beginning of the animation, but doing so adds a whole lot more damage to your combos. And while that's cool, you're probably thinking, well, if I do that, surely I'll never have shells left for the fancy big explosion at the end. Well, that's where you're wrong. See, there's also something known as inline reload. See, if you press RB to reload at the end of an attack animation, you'll perform an inline reload. This reloads one single shell. In general combat, it's a way to replenish a shell if you use it mid-combo, but when you pair it with the primed strikes, the shell buff if you will, then you can consume a shell for a buff, and then inline reload at the end of the attack, consume another, repeat the process, and then at the end of the combo you have all 4 shells left for a full concussive blast. So that altogether will look a little something like this. And that, my friends, is ultimately the difference between beginner and more advanced hammer play. Now, to be clear, that's not going to be something you can always do. It requires a heavy stamina commitment and a big window of opportunity, but know that when the behemoth goes down, that is how you do big damage. Outside of that, just try to use your shells where possible to buff your basic attacks in combat. For longer openings, work in some concussive blasts, and then dip into the big damage options when you know it's safe. So, now that you know how the weapon works, and you understand what the different moves are used for, how do we tie it all together? Again, much like the previous videos, I'm going to put together a few more extended gameplay clips just to show off some hammer play. As stated at the start, keep in mind that your weapon excels at breaking armor plating, but also staggering or knocking out monsters. So while the head isn't going to be safe for you to attack all the time, it is a location you should prioritize whenever possible. Keep in mind that while your swings may be slow, you are free to roll at all times, so I often adopt a hit and run strategy with the hammer. Usually the first couple of hits are pretty safe, it tends to be the final hit that often keeps you locked a little longer, so in times where you have limited openings, just hit and run, or roll should I say. You can better take advantage of smaller openings by using your shells to power up your hits. If you know you won't be able to get a full combo off, you might as well use the shells to beef up what hits you can land, and then when you roll out, you can pull off a quick reload. Anytime you have larger openings, then don't forget that Concussive Blast does dish out great damage, so it's for sure something you want to work in when you can. Then the full-blown buff, inline reload and Concussive Blast combo, that I typically reserve for when I knock the behemoth down, since I know I have a long enough window to do it. It might be a little confusing to pull it off to begin with, but practice it and it'll fall into place. It's now got to the point for me where buffing and inline reloading just feels like part of the hammer play, you sort of do it without thinking. And again, as always, remember that the hammer jump, while it might seem like it has limited utility in combat, it is a great interrupt. So if you see something charging at you, try to time it to take advantage of that. It might not always work, but hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained. But that, my friends, is pretty much it. That's my tutorial for the hammer. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you missed the other tutorials, then you can find them linked down below. Be sure to keep it locked as I'll be covering the remaining 2 weapons very soon. But until then, thank you very much for watching, take it easy, catch you next time, peace out.